And what kind of person would do that? Okay, so right, it tells you about that person's character or the state of mind at that time, right? So on the one hand, we shouldn't be doing that, but again, doing a 180 and saying, well, we should glorify this person. No, find some happy medium. And
Hello, and welcome to Awake at the Wheel. So in today's episode, we're going to be discussing the topic of pretty privilege. So we're living in a world these days where there's a lot more acceptance of, people of all different shapes and sizes, and there's a lot more acceptance of body positivity, be who you are. And I think that this is, certainly a good thing. In some cases, I also think that it's been taken to extremes. But nonetheless, I do still believe that there is an underlying presence of people interpreting and treating people in a certain way based on the way that an individual looks. I truly believe there is a psychological component to this that let's use babies as an example. We love babies, and that is a genetic protective factor that they are cute and adorable, and we love them because they need to be protected. So I think we can extrapolate that a bit into this whole idea of pretty privilege, where we do tend to perhaps nurture and care for and be kinder to things that look a certain way or look nice. Oren, what are your thoughts on that?
well, the research is clear that yes, I think it was Dion. I know it was Dion and Dion from the U of T. I think it was 72. I could be wrong on the date, but they wrote a paper called "What is Pretty is Good." And I don't know if they were the first people, but they captured this notion that there is a bias, that if we see someone who is attractive, we make certain assumptions about them. And I think I may have talked about this in another episode, where they would, I'll just quickly reiterate, where they had teachers look at descriptions of kids. All right, and it was the exact same description, but in one condition, the kid was cute, in the other condition, unfortunately, they were not so cute. And the teacher's interpretations of the child, because of the picture, was quite different. Right, cute kids were interpreted in a positive way, not so cute kids in a different way. Right, and there's so many other contexts in which the person's appearance is interpreted one way or the other. So this pretty privilege phenomenon that we're going to be talking about, I can't wait to see the videos and to see how it plays out, because we're visual creatures. Right. Other animals, I mean, there's probably smell privilege. Actually, even among humans, there's research suggesting, right, that the olfactory nerves or the olfactory bulb and the nerves, affect how we react to different people, even if you don't see them, just smelling them and so on. So, by the way, all that research is pretty sketchy at this point, even though some of the research is 20 years old, 25 years old. The interpretations, I wanted to tell people, because we always try to encourage people to be, let's say, wise consumers of the information they're getting. So there's all these studies about like the t-shirt. I'm going to throw it out there just because I went on this tangent. Okay. But to the point of the fact is that there's something evolutionarily based, biologically based behind these things. So there's this, there's even these dating sites now where you wear a t-shirt for, like 3 days in a row when you go to bed, and then you send your t-shirt away, and people will choose you based on the smell of the shirts. Okay. Like it was based on a study that was done a number of years ago. And the only reason I'm saying that is the original study, I used to teach about it. Okay. It seemed to suggest that women would choose men, okay, again, based purely on the smell, that the better looking men, right, had a different smell, that the smell was more indicative of, let's say, of like, it didn't smell as repugnant as the less attractive men. So what they were saying was that good looks, it's a feature, or it's a sign of good genes. They have fewer parasites, et cetera, in their body, and that it's correlated with, again, a different type of smell. And that the women, by the way, only had this effect when they were ovulating, when they, that's evolutionarily speaking, that's the only reason that they would be caring for an attractive male, or caring about an attractive male, because they would want to have his genes. Okay. It's all unconscious, it's all pre-programmed and so on. Right. So I know it's a long tangent, but the whole point is on 2 points. One is that so much of what happens today in today's society is a reflection of hundreds of thousands of years of programming before the prefrontal cortex got as big as it did, before culture affected us. We have these biological impetuses. But number two, that study that I'm talking about was so deeply flawed. Okay. And I know back then when it happened, I saw the media reports on what the study found, and it was so distorted. So as always, please, when you see a snippet or a TikTok video or something about some supposed study that claims A, B, or C, please note, first of all, 50% of all studies, especially in the social sciences or in the social sciences, are not replicated. Okay. Meaning it's garbage. It's just a fluke. It's something else like that. Okay. The researchers designed it in a certain way just to get the results that they wanted, what have you. Okay, but the point is, don't jump on all these things and go, yes, I have some answer, or this is going to help me, or whatever. Okay, it's just preliminary. It's just one, piece of potential evidence. Don't ever assume that this is fact. So, I'm sorry about the editorial, but.
No, and I think you brought up such an important point, though, that, and I misspoke earlier. I said, there's genetic basis. I meant biological, evolutionary basis for, looks being a certain way in terms of being protective. But yeah, as far as women's sense of smell, I can't remember the number, but it is exponentially stronger than that of males, likely from an evolutionary standpoint, what you said, to be able to detect and attract a male that is going to be good for reproduction. And of course, we live in a world now where that's, not our sole purpose and our sole goal. But the fact is our bodies and brains are still the same. They still have those same abilities. And I'll go on a tangent a little bit here because I imagine that some of these videos that we're going to watch, I'm just going to predict that there's going to be a lot of feminist propaganda about, we don't have to look a certain way. We shouldn't have to conform to society's expectations, blah, blah, blah. And to an extent, I do agree with that. But to another extent, I think that more people need to accept the fact that we live in a world that the first thing that people see is what they see. So our first impression is developed based on, what you are presenting to the world. So no, you don't have to dress a certain way, but you do have to understand that does play a role.
Right. So I could go on and on, but I'm sure that the videos will, be something we can launch off of. So.
All right. So let's be enlightened by the first one here.
Did you know that pretty people can get away with anything, even crime? Yes, let me show you. In the 1970s in New York, researchers asked college students to give a sentence to this person and this person. They were both accused of stealing, but the most attractive one got a sentence 5 years lighter than the other because of something called the pretty privilege. It's when our brains make attractive people look more likable, charming, and easy to forgive. And it happens everywhere. In the workforce, good-looking people get hired, promoted, and even have better performance evaluations than less attractive people. Pretty privilege is a real thing, and we need to pay attention to it. We discriminate our friends, our colleagues, even our partners because of it. But being pretty shouldn't mean you're trustworthy. So the next time you let someone into your life, ask yourself twice, do you like them because of who they are or because of what they look like? That's 1 minute. See you tomorrow.
So there's an example of, this study in the 1970s. I'm curious about the validity and reliability of those results. But that aside, I think that, what he was saying aligns with what you were saying in terms of that study with teachers and the way that they perceive students based on the way that they looked and the way that they were reprimanded. But I think that what he's saying here is really important insofar as the workplace. I think that certainly is something that plays a role. But again, that touches on what I said earlier, that we live in a society where we have to present ourselves in a certain way. I feel like I might get jumped all over for this, but that's the fact of the matter, is that we can't show up to, let's say, a job interview dressed like a schlub. Like, this is common knowledge that you present your best self in a job interview, for example, because that's the first impression that you're making. I thought it was a pretty obvious statement that he said, where, just because someone's pretty doesn't mean they're a good person.
Right.
But I wonder how much of someone's looks do color their perception of that person and their personality. And I guess the last thing that I'll say is I wonder what role it plays when people For example, if somebody gets a lesser sentence because they're pretty, or they're treated better at a restaurant, two extreme situations but similar treatment. I wonder what the provider of that treatment thinks they're going to get out of that. I imagine there is some connection there.
Right. So it's just to go back to the point that you were saying, a few things. One, let's not deny that there are so many things that are hardwired into us that, that's from the beginning of time, or beginning of, this iteration of humans, serve some adaptive evolutionary purpose. And so on the one hand, that's, as I said earlier, this biological impetus. We have these impulses. We have these biases that we can't help. And for anyone to say, well, we should just override them and ignore and judge people based on ABC, well, it's nice in theory, but I don't deal with theory. I deal with reality. Okay. Number one. Number two, even though we're talking about let's say the biological underpinnings of all this, the fact is we also have these huge prefrontal cortexes. So even though it can lead us in a certain direction, even though it can make us more susceptible to doing A, B, or C, or perceiving things a certain way, we do have the ability to dampen it, to mitigate against it, to even prevent it from happening if we are, if we're mindful of these things, if we're aware of our biases and so on. So anyone who says, well, I'm not biased, or I don't see color, blah, blah, well, that might be what you strive to do. But to pretend that there's not something happening, is it 2% effective? Is it 90% effective? Who knows how much it's affecting you? But to pretend that it's not would be to deny reality. And if you're denying reality, you can't make change. So there's nothing wrong with at least admitting to yourself that you have these automatic reflexes. Basically, they are reflexes. We can't help it. We make these interpretations before we're even consciously aware of it. So when you're saying about what does the person, like, do people who, when they're treating other people, pretty people, more nicely, are they think they're getting something out of it? Well, on the one hand, there's probably something unconscious happening. But on the other hand, yes, they are. And sometimes it's by the way, sometimes it's fantasy. It's crazy. I'm going to give an example. Okay. Years ago, I was on this TV show and they would do these social experiments. And I'd always criticize the producers and tell them what was so wrong. Because I only had to review the videos and what happened and I'd interpret why these things happen. Okay. And I would just tear apart their studies. I'd say what was so wrong and all the confounds and everything like that. And they would go, oh, we know, it's just a TV show. Okay. But one of the things that they did was they had a woman who they had two different women. One was pretty hot, quite hot. And they did this quite a few times in different contexts. And the other was not so hot. Okay. They called her Muffin Top. And each of them, okay, had a diaper, supposed dirty diaper, and they wanted to get some guy to put it in the garbage can, okay, like a little bit away. And the hot woman was more likely to get the guys to do it, okay. And when you say about what is the person hoping to get out of it, and I explained this, it's totally irrational, makes absolutely no sense. But I can tell you for a fact that it does happen. What percentage of people? I don't know. But there's this unconscious / semi-conscious fantasy that, oh, if I help this hot woman in the park, okay, with a child,
she'll sleep with me.
She'll do something with me, whatever. Okay, she's like, okay, yeah. And I've spoken to so many men, students, patients, others. And again, because I'm not judging them, I'm doing this in the spirit of collaboration and interest and so on. They do admit, yeah, in the moment, are they thinking it necessarily so clearly? No. But when they step back, they realize, oh yeah, I have done this so many times. So yes, they are hoping to get something out of it. Now, one more thing before I forget, that study about women getting attractive people getting lighter sentences, that has been replicated at least once, I know.
Okay.
But okay, it depended on the crime, because what one study showed was that if it was a crime where the person, where they felt that the woman was using her looks to her advantage, like defrauding an older gentleman, okay, they actually sentenced her more heavily, because they were resentful of her using her looks. Okay, so when it doesn't seem relevant to the crime, they just unconsciously maybe gave her a lighter sentence. But when they thought she used it intentionally, they were more likely to punish her harder. So fascinating, interplay.
So yeah, and that's an interesting point, and I, which leads to my thought of, clearly women who know that they're hot or know that they are desirable in some way are going to catch on to that, and that's going to influence their behavior going forward. And that said, to tie this to something we've spoken about before in terms of the dating world, I think that lowers perhaps the quality of personality that people are putting out there, because they're basing their desirability strictly on their looks and nothing else.
Yeah, and I think we talked about this in previous podcasts that if you won the lottery, the genetic lottery, where you are just happen to have been blessed with good looks or height, right, or certain metabolism, body shape, and so on, right? Have gratitude for that. Be thankful for that, all right? But recognize that if you bank everything on that one feature and don't try to work on these others, right? You're going to find pretty soon, hey, looks fade, something accidents happen,
exactly.
Right? You have to be a comprehensive person. And I've worked with so many people, men or women, gay, straight, doesn't matter, okay, old or young, where I say the best, you're never going to be number one, whether it's about money or looks or dancing abilities, whatever else. I say, try to be in the top 10 or 20% of 5 or 6 different attributes. Okay. Being the more rounded, comprehensive person. You're not going to get the immediate attraction that a Brad Pitt's going to get from other people, but you can, it's more effort, but you're going to be able to find people, who are, who do like that bigger package you're getting. And also, if people are going for you just because of looks, for example, well, pretty soon they're going to start getting disappointed. They're going to be resentful. That's going to be the drinking word today, I believe. I'm predicting resentment or resentful. Mm-hmm. Okay, because it's because, as I think we've talked about this before, when you start dating somebody or going out with someone, you're not going out with that person. You're going out with who you think they are, what you're projecting onto them, your fantasies, your unmet needs, your wishes, your desire. Okay. And if the person's attractive, you are unconsciously assuming so many positive traits about them. And and so you're investing your time and effort and everything. You probably put up with so much more crap than you would have otherwise done. And then later on, when you realize, whoops, I made a terrible mistake, instead of saying, whoops, I made a terrible mistake, you focus that resentment on the person. They tricked me. They fooled me. They're not the person I thought they were, and so on. Okay, so you got to be mindful of that. That's kind of the curse.
Well, and to look at the flip side of that, if you are only attracting people who are seeking out attractive people, what does that tell you about the partner that you're pairing off with here? If they're that shallow and superficial that they only care about looks, that's got to tell you something about the future of the relationship as well.
Oh, exactly. And it's so important. So again, to pretend that looks aren't important would be to deny reality. Okay. But if it's the only thing, or if that priority, I know she's got 3 heads in the freezer, but man, she's hot. Okay. If that's the kind of mindset this person has, A, what does it say about them? As you say, the shallowness, the superficiality, and B, how does that bode for the relationship? Not well.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's see what's next.
You're upset at Rico when he says, okay, I treat people better when they're pretty, but then you accept your pretty privilege or your light skin privilege or your tall privilege. Mm-hmm. Aren't you equally as wrong?
Absolutely not. And you want to know why? I intentionally use my privilege to empower others. I intentionally use my privilege to help others.
That's slope.
It's not though. It's not though. For me personally.
So if you get a free drink at the club, who do you give it to?
I might give it to my friend.
Okay. And Robin Hood, you get a little extra money.
Bingo. I will be Robin Hood of the privilege. I think every single person has the opportunity to use their powers for good or for bad. And I will pick to use my powers for good. If that means that we could use my face to skip the line and get to the front of the line, cool.
I just think to me that it's crazy that somebody would say you're shallow, but then depend on the shallow people to win in life. That's wild to me.
Okay. So where do I start with this one? I thought she was onto something at first with acknowledging the fact that she recognizes that, she does receive privileges that others don't because she's an attractive female. But then she turned it into almost like, I don't know what word to use here, but I'm using my powers for good. Yes, I believe that, whatever one's quote unquote powers are, if they can benefit other people, absolutely. But I feel like it was such a shallow example. If I get someone to buy me a drink or we can skip the line, then I'm benefiting other people. No, you're not. That's not anything, actually meaningful or robust that you're doing with these, again, quote unquote powers. But at the same time, I don't think that it would be a good idea for her to be a martyr and pretend that, I'm going to turn away these opportunities that people are giving me because of my looks. I'm, going to deny the social construct that exists. So that wouldn't be a good idea either, because back to what I was saying earlier in terms of this exists whether we like it or not. And I'm not suggesting that anyone maliciously take advantage of the fact that this exists, but if you can understand the way that the world works around you and you can turn that into something that's going to be meaningfully beneficial to either you or the people around you, why not? I honestly don't see a problem with that.
All right. Oh, so many things there, both what she said and what you said. Okay. I agree with what you're saying. Okay. I'm going to jump off on that. Okay. So first of all, I'm going to introduce a word that everyone's heard, everyone knows, but a lot of people use it improperly. Okay. When I've asked so many people, I say, what does rationalize mean to you? And I may have said this in another podcast, but people say, oh, to come up with a rational explanation or a rational argument, logical argument, whatever. I go, yes. But as a defense mechanism, rationalization is to make cheap excuses for why you do or don't do something, right? And it's unconscious, and you're just trying to justify or, again, to deny responsibility. And so when you were saying about her explanation, that for all the word that was coming to my mind was rationalize. Okay. She's saying, well, yes, I can call these people out, but it's okay for me to do it because when it comes to rationalization, it's self-glorification. It's making excuses for oneself. Okay. And that's all I saw from her was, if she had said, you know what? Yeah, I get your point. I'm being kind of hypocritical, and then explaining and showing why she does it and so on, I would have had some respect for her. Okay. But she did not see the other person's point at all. And she was being hypocritical. Okay. So it's all rationalization. Okay. Number one. Number two, and I'm going to be careful with my words. I'm going to be so careful. And I think we may have talked about this in other podcasts, but if you look at the most woke people, if you look at the most, the social justice warriors and all these other people, okay, the ones who are causing the most problems in society today, the progressives, quote unquote, all right? One thing they have in common, now not all, but if you look at it, and again, I'm going to sound like such a jerk, and I'm going to explain why. And again, I think we talked about it before, but the fact is, very few of them, very, very few, are conventionally attractive, okay? And so instead of when they were younger, and I do know we talked before about how the way people were in high school, I'll go with junior high school, even in elementary school, okay? But that can predict a lot about how they're going to be later in life. I mean, that determines how they see themselves, where their value is, what rule is. You're talking about understanding the rules of society. The rules of society end up really coming into play in high school, especially. Okay, because you're not a kid anymore. You're bridging the gap. You're in the adolescence. You're gonna be an adult pretty soon, and you're sort of seeing how the adult world works while in high school, right? So the people, if someone is very attractive, whatever, they learn that pretty quickly. And some people are humble about it and they don't exploit it. Other people do. All right, but the person who doesn't have these special attributes, they're not the most athletic, they're not the most attractive, they're not the tallest. Okay. They find other ways to climb the social hierarchy, right? They become nicer. They are more accommodating. They develop a sense of humor. They learn how to play guitar. Whatever the case is, they find a way to function better. The progressives, the woke, and so on that we're seeing. And again, I'm not besmirching everybody, and I know I am stereotyping, but we see what I interpret and many others interpret as people who never got the memo. Okay, either they think I shouldn't have to do that, and they're just bitter and resentful toward their peers, toward society, toward their parents for not giving them these genes. Whatever the case is, they never learned how to adapt, how to compensate for their deficiencies. And so today they are the most, again, the bitterness, the resentment, and so on. You can see that just fuels. And again, back to rationalization, right? None of them says, well, yes, or very few of them, says, well, yes, this is why I, am like this, right? They just rationalize and they just say oppression, hierarchy, colonialism, whatever else, anything that prevents them from having to take personal responsibility. All right. And this is black and white thinking. And this could be the other, the drinking word for today is black and white, because you and I have spent so many podcasts talking about, let's say the damage done to individuals and to groups and to society when it's a black and white thinking. right? There's lots of nuance. There's lots of gray in between. So once again, if you don't have certain privilege, find a way to compensate and don't expect it. And don't just be bitter and resentful toward those people who did. And did I do the power of spite yet in a previous podcast?
I feel like we have spoken about that, yes.
Okay, may I just quickly reiterate it?
Of course, yeah.
Okay, because I deal with it so often. It's all about perspective. So there's people who've written books about this, but most of the successful people in the world, well, it's two things. One, they had adversity. And or two, they were told by somebody either directly or they were made to feel this way that you're not good enough. You'll never be able to achieve either that specific goal or anything else or something else. Okay. And so instead of saying, oh my God, what cruel, terrible people. And by the way, I'm not making fun of anyone who's been through that, especially if it's your parents. If your parents made you feel worthless, okay? Like, again, I'm not denigrating people for that. I have nothing but compassion and empathy for people. And that's what you and I deal with in so many cases. People, doesn't matter what they look like today, doesn't matter how successful they are. When they were children or adolescents, they had to deal with either hurtful, abusive, just rejecting types of people, whether they're parents or their peers or teachers, whatever. So this is all said with compassion. But for some people, it just broke them. It crushed them. It othered them. And they weren't able to move forward from that. But other people, for whatever reason, they have the hardiness and the resilience to channel what I call the power of spite. Okay, they were fueled or motivated by this harshness, the rejection, whatever, and say, screw you, I'm going to show you. And what I tell people all the time is I say, that is such a healthy perspective. Sadness, hurt, betrayal, all of that, those are disempowering feelings. But anger, the power of spite, it motivates you, it propels you, and it causes you to do better. And you want to show those people. However, just one thing about that, I say, if spite is the only thing that encourages you and motivates you to do things that are good for yourself, you're going to die a bitter, burnt out, broken person, because that will get to you. So I say, don't live through spite. Don't focus on only that. But I say, in those moments where you have a choice, either, allow yourself to be crushed or say, no, I'm going to, somehow elevate myself. I'm going to crush you, whatever fantasy you have, just use it to channel, to propel you into the healthy trajectory. Okay. But then after that, to try to find ways to deal with that so that you aren't, again, this bitter, resentful, broken, spiteful person. It's only a small burst, just a little burst here or there, just to prevent you from falling into sadness, depression, feeling helpless.
Yeah, and if folks want to check out our conversation about that, it was in our episode about work ethic and raising a winner. So we talked about that at length. That just came to me.
Okay,
but I want to kind of look at what you said from the flip side of things. And I'll approach this with caution. But for anyone watching this on YouTube, I, clearly know how to do my hair and my makeup and dress a certain way and look a certain way. But the way that I look at it is I have a number of things working against me. I'm disabled. I'm a woman of color. So there's, some disadvantage that may or may not come along with that. So I recognize that the first thing that I want people to think and know about me aren't those disadvantages that I have, but instead the way that I present myself to the world is in a manner that is appealing and is going to perhaps get me how do I phrase this? Put me in a position that is not going to highlight my disadvantages and rather present me in a way that is going to be the way that I want to be presented. And I danced around that a bit because, again, I don't want to suggest that I'm, conforming to society's expectations of women and whatever else anybody wants to say. But my point in sharing that personal example is that it is important to recognize that, yeah, everybody has something working against them. But if you can highlight or enhance things that aren't working against you, this is how we operate as balanced human beings.
Exactly. And once again, it goes back to perspective. And you're right about people should watch our discussion with Hank or Henry Sveck about raising a winner. It's about perspective. And I guess we'll talk about the dark side of pretty privilege afterward, because there are disadvantages that come with that, right?
Sure.
But for everything, and I want to be so clear here, because so many people on TikTok or whatever else like that, they don't bring the nuance that we try to bring, which is, it's not to say that it's easy. It's not to even say that it's fair. It's to say this is the state of reality. And to try to deny reality, which little tangent here, but it's completely relevant. We know for a fact that so many young people, especially the woke, but so many young people are not getting the message of, you know what, look, the world is not fair. You've been raised in luxury, just a couple hundred years ago, or even 100 years ago. All right, just trying to struggle to survive was, that's what your focus was on. The focus was on trying to be able to eat, not on the grievances that people see every single day. So again, so many people today in today's world, I know higher rates of anxiety, depression, etc. So many people feel so many things are out of reach. They can't get a house. The water's going to poison them. Whatever the case, World War III is going to happen. Whatever the case is, I am not minimizing any of that. What I'm saying is, if you take a healthy perspective and realize, life really is difficult. And by the way, anyone watching this in North America, we're in in one of the most fortunate places ever. There's privilege. Just the fact that we can actually watch the internet, that's privilege right there. There's always going to be privilege, right? So the point is,
on the fact that we can freely discuss these things, that's privilege too.
Exactly. The fact that the internet's not being disrupted right now because bombs aren't falling on us. Okay. There's so much. Yeah. And this goes back to something we've said so many times. Again, it's not to deny reality, and it's not to deny the hardships that you may be going through. But it's recognizing that if I have the right perspective, and one of those elements is gratitude. If I can find one thing I'm grateful for, just one, it's going to help just at least mitigate the impact of the grievances, of feeling bitter and resentful. Okay, that that I wasn't born this way, or I didn't have this luxury, and so on. So anyway, a little side note there.
Yeah. All right. So let's check out the third one.
That's what I find so tragic about these young, pretty, conservative women. You're such a gaslighted demographic because one of the pillars of this ideology that you're bought into is that some people are just inherently superior and inferior people deserve to be exploited. And sure, women are technically property, but you don't have to worry about that because you are hot property. Exceptions will be made for you. So you're more than willing to play into this needlessly cruel game because you've been assured that you'll win. And soon the young winning man of your dreams will look at you and say, yes, that is what I'm supposed to want, and acquiring her will make me look like a superior man. And on your way to your superior life together, you will become his obedient, righteous, lonely domestic servant. Congratulations. Until one day, you get a scary mammogram. And you discover that he never signed up to be a nursemaid. And unlike you, the young 24-year-old bleach blonde at the office understands that he's the most important person in any room. And she'll have no qualms about poaching your mate because he's her ticket to a superior life. And at that moment, when the handle has snapped off of the basket that held all of your eggs, you might realize that you were flattered into giving your entire life away in service of a man who only ever saw you as a commodity, because I assure you, that is how these men see you. And being hot property won't have protected you from a life of being used up and discarded. But here's the kicker. You'll have sunk so much of your life into proving your own politics right that you won't be able to direct that rage in the appropriate direction, because that will mean admitting that you were had. So there you'll be, a middle-aged woman with a pert haircut and great Botox, standing in line at a Kroger, making the fact that your life didn't turn out as promised into an assistant manager's problem, because don't they know that exceptions are supposed to be made for you. Good luck, babe. Good luck.
Damn, that's projection if I've ever seen it. But anyways, didn't I call it in the beginning that one of them was going to be a feminist going on about this, that, and the other?
Valerie, I was holding my I wanted to say, I said, oh, prediction met. Okay, very good. Yeah. Okay. Yep.
So, okay, where do I start with this train wreck? Okay, so the fact that she brings in people's political views was odd.
Yeah.
Talking about these, I think she said hot conservative women.
Yeah.
she did touch on something I mentioned earlier, that it sounds like the man she's describing is somebody who only values looks. So she paints this picture of, this poor woman getting a devastating diagnosis, and then he goes off with the, office hussy, whatever. Okay, great. That's terrible. What I found ironic too is that she appeared to be conventionally attractive. So that was, kind of comical that she's going on about this, that, and the other. But what a long walk. That's kind of what my takeaway from that is like, holy crow, what a long walk that, from point A to the end of that video was. That, I have a hard time believing that people, like her Kroger example, how she said, you're going to be in the Kroger talking to the assistant manager saying exceptions should be made for me. I really don't think that people are that one-sided in their understanding of how the world works. And perhaps some are, but she's presenting this as black and white, that if you subscribe to this, notion of being the pretty conservative woman, this is what your outcome is going to be like. So it's so one-sided. It was such a long walk. And it was ironic, really.
Well, yeah. And in another episode, we were talking about how people are making these videos, and sometimes they have good points, but they infuse the video and the points with their own agenda, and they make it so specific that it's hard to take them seriously. It's hard to see the whole point because it's so obvious what they're saying. So, yeah, I don't know, because I don't know her, and I don't know what her other videos look like. All right. But to me, all I heard was anti-conservative rant. That's all I said, right? What a stupid video. What a stupid point. Because, yeah, sure, that what you described fits a certain conservative male stereotype or female stereotype, but that has nothing to do with politics. We can see that on the left, right, center. It's just universal, what she said. And the point about being at a store or whatever, and yes, some people, true, like that it's not so much, well, I'm upset with my life, and so I'm going to take it out on this person. It's just that this person was raised to be entitled, to be maybe narcissistic, and not to put emphasis on other aspects beyond your looks. And so then you look down on others if they're not as pretty. So it wasn't about everything else she said. There were so many points that she made that if she had focused on them in the proper way, she could have had an impact. Instead, it was just, like, I see it as just a rant against conservatism or against conservative women. That's what I saw. It was,
yeah. And you're right. She was describing a sense of entitlement, but to suggest that everybody who is attractive is entitled, I mean, that's not reasonable.
No. And here's an interesting thing. I think we talked about this in previous podcasts. It's a reality. It's a stereotype. It's a cliche. And I've asked like so many people, and it's most people end up getting it. Some get it like right on the spot, which is what, and again, I hate to stereotype like this, but we've seen it. I'm going to give you two different things, if I may. So first I say, if you see, it can be men or women. All right. But the more stereotypes of women, but the fact is it happens to men as well. If you see someone who is, let's say, traditionally very attractive, all right, or very well put together, et cetera, all right, and they have crippling anxiety, or they're painfully shy, or they don't have self-confidence, or they're really humble, right? Not what you expect. Not in every case, but in so many cases, I ask people, what do I know about their childhood, or what do I infer about their childhood? What would you say, besides being raised by good?
I would say some degree of perfectionism was promoted.
Okay, maybe. That could be in some, but far more common is that when they were younger, right, they were not attractive. They were either heavy or whatever, and that was that's how they perceive themselves, because at the youngest of ages, that's when our self narratives start to develop.
Fair enough,
right?
yeah.
And so I say that, and and so they don't have that sense. They don't feel like a privileged person or a pretty person or a handsome person or something like that, right? So it's so common that I do see that, and that's the power of our past, of our childhood. And we've talked about this in so many other contexts, whether it's traumatic or whether it was entitled or whatever else like that. It helps set the stage. It doesn't make it 100% that you're going to turn out this way, but it does, it makes you more susceptible to going certain ways. So that's one thing. Then the second thing, talking about pretty privilege. And I've said this to so many people. So I've had very many attractive, let's say male as well, but it's more the female. With male, it manifests differently. Okay. But I'm going to ask you, okay? There's we may have done this before, I don't remember. let's just say I'm going to say a 25-year-old, strikingly beautiful woman at a restaurant, bar, club, whatever. All right. And she has, she has social anxiety. She's so insecure. Okay. So she withdraws. She's not, she's not having a big smile or whatever. She's withdrawn into herself. Okay. Because of the crippling anxiety or insecurity. What will most males and females, probably particularly females, just because of how evolution works and competition and judgment and so on, but what do they interpret about her?
She's a bitch.
She's a bitch, exactly. And I say that. I say to my patients, I go, and if you are unattractive and you're acting the same way, okay, they just think, that makes sense. Okay, because, right? So that's an example of pretty privilege, the dark side of it, that to make people make all these false assumptions about the person. It's automatic. Okay. And most people don't step back and go, well, maybe they do have anxiety or whatever, unless the person actually.
Maybe there's layers to this human being that go beyond how they look.
Exactly. But that's the power of stereotype, the power of scripts and schemata, where it's programmed. We see something, we're pattern recognition machines. I think we've talked about this before. We are pattern recognition. So if you see such an obvious pattern of attractive, we make all these assumptions about the person. And so for somebody who is conventionally attractive, whether as a child or as an adult, whenever, to have these burdens put on them, right? It's like tall people. Again, some people are going to think, wow, what a burden. And they think of the cost-benefit analysis. But for a lot of tall people, the assumption is they must be good in certain sports, like basketball or volleyball or whatever. Like that's an assumption. And when you don't play out that way, there's a heavier, let's say, repercussion.
Yeah. Well, there's a feeling of not measuring up to this expectation.
No pun intended.
Oh, yeah. So another darker side of this pretty privilege concept, and I know that this is controversial, so I want to approach it with empathy. But I think that it's gone perhaps too far in the other direction, where there's advertisements in magazines and online that obesity and unhealthy lifestyles are aspirational and beautiful. And I'm not saying that such people are not beautiful. I want to be abundantly clear about that. But again, it's the promotion of this unhealthy lifestyle. I can't remember what magazine it was on, but I just saw a cover. I think it was an older cover, but it said, obesity is healthy. And it literally had an obese individual on there, like doing a ballet pose, and it was saying that obesity is healthy. In what world? There's no science that supports the fact that, being unhealthily overweight is good for one's body and long-term health. I can see the spirit of this because, again, we live in a world where there's a very narrow expectation of, I'll use women as an example, how women should look and what's deemed attractive. So I get it. I get where it's coming from, but it's too much in the other direction.
Well, again, black and white. Okay. It's total black. And it's interesting. I'm going to take that to another level, where I forget the name of the man. I think he's a neurologist. He was on, I think, Chris Williamson's podcast. Very intelligent, very engaging. I really liked him. But he was talking, he's not the only person, and I understand why they're saying this, but they're talking about, they say there's literally no such thing as free will. Okay. Because it's all about genetics, epigenetics, your history, where you were born, all this other stuff. And they say, so because of all this, you have no choice but to go a certain way. Okay. And what they're saying is, when I was listening to him, he said it with such empathy. What he was trying to say was that we shouldn't just judge people for who they are. We shouldn't. And if you happen to be really successful or whatever, don't think that you're a special person. Right? Just recognize that you had certain privileges. Born in this place, had these certain parents, had certain genes, whatever. Right? So I get all that. Here's where black and white comes in, though. So their point that he's trying to make, and others like him, are saying, like, don't just be so judgmental. Have some more compassion. Have some empathy. Don't have simplistic solutions like, if someone is heavy or overweight, right? Say, well, stop eating so much. Well, the fact is they have certain genes that make, food more appealing to them, that they're not satiated like other people are. Like, there's all these different factors. I get it. But the fact is to say, well, because of that, just throw your hands up and say, no, we're going to go in the opposite direction. Say, well, no, obesity is actually a good thing, right? And then when you look at all the people who were formerly overweight or obese or whatever, and I'm not speaking, like, again, we don't want to use anecdotes to say that this should be the way for everybody, right? But so many people said, if no one had ever told me, hey, guess what? You're not attractive, or you're unhealthy, or, you look like a slob, or you're not going to get a job looking that way, or people are going to judge you. They said if people hadn't said that, whether it was in an empathetic way or in a cruel way, they said, I would not have made the right changes, because there are some changes you can make, right? And yes, if your genes are a certain way, if you have certain, proclivities and so on, it makes it harder to do something or to not do something, but it doesn't make it impossible in most cases,
Exactly.
right? And that's the concern with this, again, as you're saying, this body positivity movement and everything. No, we shouldn't shame somebody. And there were videos before, and someone, I think, lost her job because she was like in a change room, and she was like taking a video of someone who was overweight and just like making fun of her. That's reprehensible.
That's awful.
No,
That's horrible.
it's disgusting.
Yeah.
And what kind of person would do that? Okay. So, right. It tells you about that person's character or the state of mind at that time. Right. So on the one hand, we shouldn't be doing that. But again, doing a 180 and saying, well, we should glorify this person. No, find some happy medium. And that's why one of the reasons you and I made this podcast was to try to find all the gray and nuance in between the black and the white.
Yeah. Yeah. We don't want to celebrate complacency, right? It's about acknowledging that maybe something is harder for you, but there's almost always a way around it.
Right. And we don't want to, going back to the word I said earlier about rationalize, we don't want to rationalize someone's, lack of effort or bad choices and so on. And by the way, and we've talked about this in other podcasts, but just to throw this out one more time, this whole rationalization, the fact that people now automatically will say, well, no, you can't say that because intersectionality. Don't you know that not only does this person have this problem, but they also happen to have this color skin or this sexual orientation or blah, 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 blah. Therefore, it's by nature. Okay. Like, we can't even talk about this. Okay. Because now you're a racist or now you're homophobic or whatever. It's like, no. We can recognize that these things might have an impact. But as you said a second ago, it doesn't mean that they shouldn't try their hardest to elevate themselves, for the, for whoever, for whatever, reason. Yeah. But again, just throwing up your hands and saying, if you even dare question or even dare talk, you not even question, even talk about it. Now you are racist, sexist, homophobic, transphobic, blah, 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 right? And this is what's happened. And this is why I said earlier, think about the people who started that type of messaging. Take a look at them. They were not people who learned to adapt to their early circumstances. No, they are people who are resentful and decided to take their past traumas, their past adversities, their past, disappointments and difficulties, and now are using those as a weapon to beat down everybody else. It's so obvious in so many of these cases. There are probably exceptions. I'm sure there are. And by the way, people later on who jump on the bandwagon, that's just weak-minded. That's just people, who are sheep. So you can find many people who, that person is very attractive, but they're espousing the same garbage. Well, that's because whether for validation, whether they want to get virtue signal points, whether their job depends on it, whether their cognitive dissonance reduction forces them to see things a certain way because they bought into it for whatever reason. Those people, again, they came later on. I'm talking about the people who first started promoting so much of this. And again, there are exceptions. I want to be clear here. I'm not saying every single person, but more often than not, we see certain patterns we can recognize and we go, oh, that's why they developed the way they did and why they're making these messages the way they are now. And again, it's having such a harmful impact on society, and it's taking away self-advocacy, it's taking away personal responsibility. And once again, I want to say it one last time, I'm not just sitting here and saying, well, just pull up your bootstraps. Some people either it's almost impossible to do. Some cases it is impossible depending on what the circumstances are. Okay. In the very rare cases. But in most cases, it's just damn difficult, but not impossible. And for anybody to look at two different people who are from two different circumstances and to think that they should have the equal ability, equal motivation, equal opportunity, and equal outcomes, that would be stupid, ridiculous, and just like not, it's divorced from reality. So I'm not saying that. I'm just saying, one person might have a much easier way of time of doing it, but it doesn't mean that the other person who has a much harder time shouldn't do it. And forget about society's dictates or whatever. Do it for yourself, because you will do better in life if you. Again, I'm not just talking about attractiveness. I'm talking about health. I'm talking about exercise. I'm talking about focusing on a goal and trying to achieve it. That's what we're talking about. Self-improvement, whatever form it takes.
Yeah. And to summarize what you said there, people can do hard things. We are equipped to do hard things, and that's okay. And, I don't want to go on too much of a tangent, but we've talked about this so many times that, expand your ability to deal with discomfort and you'll be amazed at what you can actually accomplish.
Exactly.
So with all this being said, let's talk about what people can do about this. So again, I said this from the get-go. I recognize that perhaps it's an unpopular opinion, but the world is what it is at the moment. And if we can identify, whether it has to do with our appearance or otherwise, and I would say I'm leaning more towards looking at the person as a whole. But if we can identify areas of deficit, areas of strength, and we can enhance those areas of strength, I think that is our job as self-actualized human beings to strive for that, because everybody has things that they're great at, everybody has things that they're not so great at, but to wallow in this victimhood mentality of, well, this is how I am and these are all the reasons that I am this way and society's against me, I'm just going to sit here and again wallow. You're not serving anything to your benefit in that respect.
Right. And again, we're saying all this with a lot of compassion and empathy, as always. Okay. It's not some simple solution. And one thing you can do, and unfortunately, people don't do this. Okay. But find somebody similar to you who did achieve, who did rise above their circumstance. Use them as your role model. What most people do is they'll say, oh, they must have had some advantage, or they cheated, or people have a hard time recognizing that. Again, as you say, humans have a great capacity for overcoming adversity. Not easy, but it can be very difficult, and maybe you won't succeed. But find someone, again, as I said, who motivates you. Whether it's a person that you actually know, or it's someone that you heard about, or something like that. And don't try to find all these rationalizations to exonerate you, to make you not have to think about what's my own role in all of this. How can I do better for myself? Because the reality is, in the end, very rarely can you depend on other people exclusively for your betterment, right? It doesn't happen, but for the most part, you can't. You need to, in the end, it always boils down to what do I need to do? What can I do for myself? Okay. And again, so many podcasts, we've talked about the different ways people can advocate for themselves. So that's one path. And as you say, the other path is just to wallow in misery, in resentment. Okay. Right. And that's not healthy. And sadly, though, that is what's being rewarded in society for the last number of years. And that's one of the reasons we did this podcast. Okay, that the self-efficacy, the self-advocacy, the self-agency, that is no longer being rewarded. I mean, you derive the benefits, you derive the rewards yourself. But that's not the messaging being provided to children through TikTok, on TV, or whatever else. No, the message is the world, hierarchical, colonialism, white superiority, blah, blah, blah. And so it's unfair. If you don't have all of these different privileges, then you're screwed, right? And you and I are trying to say, no. It might make it more difficult, but A, the people who do have these privileges, there's other things that are working against them. And B, if you don't have them, find ways, make your own privilege. Well, I guess privilege is the wrong word, but make your own advantage.
Yes, absolutely. So we want to hear what our listeners think about this. What do you think about pretty privilege? Is it a thing? Is it not a thing? Did we miss something? Let us know in the comments what you think and if you want to hear more about this topic.
All right. And on that note, until next time, keep your eyes on the road and your hands upon the wheel.